Yeah, you ready to do this? Let's do it! Let's go! They say it pays the cost to be the boss. Time to show them who's in charge. Praise the Lord for my same thing crash with this beat. I thank the Lord for my that I smash every week. I put it all in the guts and now go fast asleep. Since she been on me for months and left my message on scene. I put it to you like this. You dust me in this, I'll let you have that. Open that mosh pit up. Let's drop it.
Sidekick. Inadequate. Replaceable. Stubborn. Unreliable. In over your head. Untrustworthy. Uncontrolled. A monster. Pretender. A wise, cracking disappointment. Is that all you see when you see yourselves? Because I see more. Master Bruce saw more. He saw greatness. He saw potential. Saw the future of Gotham. Remember, everything he was is within you. And everything he could never be is why you'll be so much more.
Remember, when you reach the morgue, find Captain Mathias' body. Get his print codes, and the computer's all ours.
Loop and transmit all personnel. This is Senior Medical Officer Nicole Brennan. Medical is overwhelmed. We need help. Look at his wounds. We can't handle so many trauma cases, and the command crew won't tell us what's happening. He's seizing. Shit. Maybe I have some PHP left.
Страховити офертите очакват на сайта на Laptop.bg. Вземи Acer Nitro 5 с мощен Intel Core i7 и G.
Reserves depleted. Main engines offline.
Live streams showing off early footage, and that recent trailer, we haven't seen all that much concrete gameplay. That all changed a few weeks ago when press got hands-on with the first 3 chapters of the game, equating to about 3 hours, and boy is there a lot to talk about. Personally, I haven't really been sure how to feel about this remake going in. I think the original Dead Space is a masterpiece, one of the finest horror games you can play today. And despite its age, I think the art direction holds up and it still looks really good. Honestly, it's harder to see a Dead Space remake needing to exist in the same way as games like Resident Evil 2 and Final Fantasy VII Remake, which so thoroughly redefined their respective originals, both of which are over 2 decades old. So I went into this thing kind of wondering how it's going to justify its existence. After playing this remake, I wouldn't say my mind has completely changed on that front. I don't know if a Dead Space remake needs to exist. However, I did have a really excellent time with this game. I think EA Motive has nailed the look and feel of Dead Space and are bringing a bunch of changes, both big and small, to help create a fresh experience. I was super bummed when I hit the end of Chapter 3 because I just kind of wanted to keep going, and on a whole, it has me feeling really excited about Dead Space again. Something I wasn't sure I would feel again after the disappointment of Dead Space 3. So if that's the goal of this remake, to revitalize the franchise and remind people why Dead Space is so damn good, then I think it's going to be a huge success. So why don't we just dive right in, shall we? But first up, gotta let you know that while we did play the first 3 chapters, we could only capture chapters 2 and 3, which is why I don't have footage of the remake's chapter 1 to show you. So you might be wondering, what type of remake is this? If I was to be really reductive for a moment and create a line graph featuring video game remakes, on one end I'd have a game like The Last of Us Part 1, which features a complete visual overhaul, but is otherwise the same game we all remember. The other end of the spectrum would be something like Final Fantasy VII Remake, which completely reimagines the story, characters, and gameplay. The Dead Space remake sits somewhere in the middle. At its core, based on these opening chapters, the game follows the same beats as the original. The level design is mostly the same, and at least so far, the story is the same. But within that familiar framework, changes are made to either update certain elements to match modern game design or provide unexpected wrinkles to the gameplay in order to freshen up the experience for longtime fans. For example, our boy Isaac Clarke talks now.
They're out of fuel. The centrifuge is offline. We're tethered to a 4 trillion ton payload. Without the engines, it's dragging us down to the planet.
Can you handle it alone?
Sure. Fix the centrifuge, get the fuel running, then do a full restart.
This is undoubtedly going to be a point of contention for some people. Even back when Isaac got his voice in Dead Space 2, there was a large part of the audience that didn't care for it, preferring the silent Isaac of the original. I think there's a strong argument to be made for both cases, but for me personally, I actually really like that he talks now. It's not like they turned him into a never-ending quip machine, he just engages in the conversations when people call him. It just feels more natural to have him actually respond to people talking to him or expressing a personality at all, such as concern for the whereabouts of his girlfriend Nicole. It worked in the original when we didn't know anything about Isaac and he was kind of a blank slate, but now that we've had 2 games with him as an established character, I think it would be weird to go back to him being silent. It really helps that Isaac's voice actor returns for the role, making the remake's Isaac feel more connected to the Isaac of Dead Space 2 and 3. And it's not just Isaac. The rest of Dead Space's small cast of characters has been updated with new faces and voice actors. The script follows the overall same structure, but lines have been rewritten, resulting in characters like Hammond, for example, having a slightly different personality. Back in the original game, Hammond kind of came across as a hard-ass, barking orders, and trying to keep the mission going despite how fucked everything was.
We can still do this. Get me the captain's rig codes and we'll find Nicole.
But in the remake, he feels more like a guy trying his best to keep a level head and hold it together.
Isaac, have you heard from Daniel? We were attacked. She ran the other way.
In turn, Kendra isn't immediately as hostile and distrusting towards Hammond in the beginning. Audio logs have also seen changes, and in some cases, outright changed to be completely different. It's hard to judge right now how these changes will shake out. I don't think the original script and dialogue was bad, but it certainly wasn't the best part of the game either, so I'm all for Motive choosing to update it. The real question is whether more serious deviations will happen in later chapters. Of course, a big part of a remake is its visuals, and holy heck, this game is gorgeous. I mean, just look at it. Everything in the game has seen some sort of update, and some of the changes are pretty mind-blowing. The most exciting part about this is not just that it looks nice though, it's that these modern visuals can mix up and enhance the horror. The game is a lot darker overall, and that means more opportunities to show off new lighting techniques. For example, I really love how the shots on your weapon now light up the space around them, creating this really intense feel. I mean, just compare how it looks here with the pulse rifle in Dead Space original versus how it looks in the remake. Something really important though is that I think EA Motive has nailed the aesthetic of the original. Remakes can often struggle to maintain the original's look and tone, going too far, or ending up feeling uncomfortably different. Not the case here. I just thought, oh yeah sure, this looks better, but this is what I picture when I think of Dead Space. It wasn't until I got home and compared the two that I realized how much was actually that different. One of the changes I quite liked was the inclusion of circuit breakers next to a lot of the power socket puzzles. When you place the, power rectangle? Yeah, let's go with that. When you place the power rectangle into the power socket, the breaker will light up. You then have to choose where power is diverted to. The first one you come across teaches you the concept by having you pick between powering a door or an elevator. Then a later example requires you to turn on the power to a console, but doing so you have to make the choice between turning off the lights or the oxygen. The remake also lifts the control scheme and mechanics from Dead Space 2 and plops it in here. That means snap your controls using the B button as a health pack and stomp it on enemies to collect their goodies, something I actually forgot wasn't in the original. You might think how this affects the pacing of Dead Space, but because the remake was built around these updates, they kind of compensate the enemies for these changes, so I found the pacing and rhythm of combat to feel pretty much the same. I think it still has that slower horror pace that the original Dead Space is known for, and that's a good thing. Same goes with the weapons, which all feel good and the way you expect. An interesting change is that you'll actually find some of the weapons naturally as you play, rather than collecting their blueprints and purchasing them at the shop. For example, I found the flamethrower right before entering the area in Chapter 3, where the walls are covered in flesh, and they start throwing these little annoying guys that are best handled with, the flamethrower. I'm curious if this is going to be the case with every weapon, or if there will still be ones you pick up blueprints for. Blueprints for ammo and other items are still a thing, so it's not like you aren't doing that as well. So you might have seen the developers talk about how the Ishimura is now a more seamless map with no loading times, and you can walk from one end of the ship all the way to the other. And when I first heard this, I thought to myself, well, that's neat, but how does that actually play out? The original game is separated very cleanly from chapter to chapter, and you weren't even able to travel back to previous areas. Well, it turns out in this version of Dead Space, the good old Ishimura transit system is a bit busted now, which means instead they've added these new sections to help bridge chapters. For example, when traveling from Chapter 1 to 2, you take the service tunnel to get into the medical bay. Or for Chapter 3, you actually have to head back to the hangar and travel through a new zero-gravity area to get into engineering. I think this is a great change. Not only is it a neat way to help bridge the game together as a seamless experience, it also kind of breaks up the repetitiveness of using the tram at the beginning and end of every level. Now that said, once you unlock the train, you can use it at any time to return to previous locations. It's unclear to what extent you want to return to previous areas, but one reason might be for the new security locks. You'll find doors and lockers with a security level, and during certain story beats, you'll unlock higher tiers, and then you can go back to these locked rooms if you want to collect extra resources. These locks are basically replacements for the original node lock doors in the original, where you had to waste a power node to open up a door and, well, hope that that door had good stuff to find, because otherwise, hey, you wasted a power node. That means in this version, backtracking is more linked to narrative progression. I'm not sure entirely how I feel about this. I did sort of like the risk-reward of using a power node and hoping you got something good, but as long as it's balanced right, I think it's a fine change. Another reason to return to previous areas might be for side missions. That's right, Dead Space 1 has optional quests now. Based on what we've played, these seem to be pretty sparring, as there was only one side mission we encountered in the first 3 chapters. What's interesting is that this mission was actually about Nicole, Isaac's girlfriend. When you visit the medical bay, the place where Nicole worked, Isaac naturally brings up wanting to find her, prompting the side mission. This basically means going slightly off the beaten path to find hologram recordings of her in an attempt to discover what happened to her. This sparks a scavenger hunt that essentially encompasses the entire ship. I love the idea of using small side objectives to help flesh out and see Nicole early in as a character, which ties really well to Isaac having a personality now. I'm very curious to see how many of these optional side missions there are in the game, and how the potential for backtracking affects the overall pacing. I'm feeling really good about what I've played of this remake. It's pretty clear EA Motive gets what makes Dead Space such a classic, and I think they're treating the changes with a lot of care and respect, at least in these first 3 chapters. Intriguingly, when fellow GameSpotter Jordan Ramey interviewed the developers, they didn't bring up events from the final 4 chapters. That covers the part of the game on the Valor all the way up into the game's final conclusion. For as much as I've praised the original as a masterpiece this whole time, I gotta be honest, the final few chapters are big stinkers for me. It's a huge drop in both storytelling and gameplay quality, and the conclusion is really lackluster. While this is just speculation on my part, I think the fact that the developers aren't sharing what the final chapters of the remake are like implies a much greater level of change for the rest of the game. That's something I would personally really like to see, and could be the thing that makes this remake go from a good update to the original to something that could even surpass the original. Maybe. Hopefully. We'll just have to wait and see for ourselves when the game comes out on January 27th. And hey, if you're dying to know even more about Dead Space after watching this video, I highly recommend heading over to GameSpot.com.
Hi, my name is Philippe Ducharme, senior producer on Dead Space. Today, I'm here to give you a first look at one of my favorite sections in the game. So we find ourselves here in the Ishimura's hangar at the beginning of Chapter 3. We're going to make our way towards the control room in engineering, where we'll attempt to restart the ship's engine. For those of you who remember the original, the hangar was much smaller than it is now. We get to explore this location and literally fly through it before heading to our destination. Navigating between chapters without load screens or having a camera cutaway is part of how we've reimagined the Ishimura for the remake. We don't need to rely on the tram as the sole way to get between chapters. It is now a seamless, interconnected ship.
Entering vacuum.
We've got 2 lurkers here. You can quickly get rid of them with the pulse rifle or Isaac's trusty plasma cutter. There aren't many traditional firearms on board. To survive, you may have to improvise and choose how to take each necromorph down. We're now entering the ship. We have a lot to show you, so let's skip ahead to Chapter 3. We've just received a briefing to head over to the refueling station. To get there, we're passing through the machine shop over here. If you needed to backtrack or simply wanted to explore the ship further, you may encounter a completely different experience. Different enemies. The ambience and lighting may change. This is what we call the intensity director. It keeps the Ishimura unpredictable and brings some additional tension and challenge. The way to refueling station is just a little further ahead. As you can see, some memorable moments are authentic to the original. We've added tons of graphical enhancement that support strategic dismemberment. Using kinesis, we'll bring that gondola over and make our way to the south refueling station. We need to gain access to the fuel management office, which contains the power functions for the refueling station. We can follow that cable to find our way there. One of the things we tried to achieve was to add more context to the various objectives, to expand on what was there, and bring a bit more detail and depth where we could. The refueling station has no power. We can look for a way to access the fuel management office. This card should allow us in, and we can now make our way back.
Isaac. Hammond.
Daniels? You made it?
Thank God. After the bridge, we thought...
Glad to disappoint. I barricaded myself in the computer core. I can hear them, but I don't think they know I'm here. Isaac, I tracked down your rig. You're an engineer, right? I'll get myself admin privileges. Maybe I can help.
Now that we have access to this room, we're faced with a very tough choice. We could cut power to life support and rely on air canisters for oxygen, but today we'll play the section without lights instead. With power restored, the south refueling station can now be activated.
Decontamination sequence activated. Please stand by.
In the decontamination room, using new tech, we've cranked up the tension. Dynamic smoke creates that thick and opaque atmosphere that makes you lose track of the lurkers, even when they're right next to you. It adds to the claustrophobia, the feeling of being locked in with a pack of necromorphs. Our last stop is the centrifuge. It's offline, and the Ishimura is getting dragged down to the planet below.
Please attach generator modules.
We've added so much detail in here. Particle effects, lighting, floating debris. We wanted this room to be imposing and tell a story at the same time. It's a lot more impressive, and its size makes it harder to keep track of the incoming necromorphs. So audio plays a huge role here in identifying the direction of threats. With one of the generator modules back in place, we can head to the second one. Flying in zero-G and not being anchored to the surface makes spatial awareness extremely important. Combat encounters can quickly become deadly, especially with leapers. And now, with the generator modules powered up, the centrifuge is ready to be activated.
Generator module attached. Clutch engaged.
personnel clear for centrifuge restart.
I hope you enjoyed this sneak peek at the new Dead Space. Thank you for tuning in.
was expected. The setting and enemy designs are certainly unnerving, but in a way I've seen before, quite literally a week prior when John, Luke, and I were previewing the Dead Space remake. But the Callisto Protocol stands out in what it does differently from its spiritual successor, that it injects a compelling melee combat system into a survival horror game. Many survival horror games keep their monsters more than an arm's length away, allowing you to keep them at bay with a handgun, plasma cutter camera, or some other manner of clicking and shooting. The Callisto Protocol breaks that mold, amping its tension by encouraging you to aggressively deal with whatever gross monster you're fighting, and that makes for some fun combat. Developed by Striking Distance Studios, the Callisto Protocol sees you play as Jacob Lee, who's being kept in Black Iron, a prison located upon Callisto, one of Jupiter's moons. Jacob quickly finds himself needing to escape as a deadly infection sweeps Black Iron, transforming the former human inhabitants into monstrous mutations referred to as biophages. So far, Jacob seems to match the energy of the male survival horror protagonist we've seen in recent years, often speaking to himself when figuring out where to go for his next objective, or cursing out the monsters he's going up against following an especially harrowing encounter. He certainly cuts the tension a tad more than I would like, but the Callisto Protocol's atmosphere is so unsettling that it claws its way back under your skin quickly enough. Instead of cinematic cutscenes and regular conversations between Jacob and the other human survivors, the Callisto Protocol seems to build most of its story with audio logs, some of which detail truly unsettling events. These are all optional, so you can miss out on a lot of lore if you just speed through the events of the story. More so than the story, what struck me most about the Callisto Protocol is its combat. Lots of survival horror protagonists are either trained in the use of firearms, or everyday people trying to make do with makeshift weapons that can keep the monsters at bay. Regardless, there's a sense of precision to combat in these games, whether it means pulling off the perfect headshot or lining up a limb to sever. Similarly, the Callisto Protocol prioritizes precision, but by putting that emphasis on melee combat, you suddenly need to pull off exact movements in the heat of a brawl instead of from a distance. It's not unlike the sensation of playing a game like For Honor, albeit in a sci-fi setting. You're also fighting some truly gross-looking monsters. In a lot of ways, the biophages are very similar to Dead Space's necromorphs. Both enemies are highly mutated creatures that stretch and contort the human form into something, while monstrous manages to still be terrifyingly recognizable. The Callisto Protocol manages to break free from Dead Space's shadow by changing how you deal with this threat, forcing you to act with precision within lunging range, which is a whole different kind of trepidation to deal with. This does lessen the fear factor of these creatures a bit though. A zombie or necromorph or ghostly spirit that's being kept at a distance can be viewed in all its ghastly glory. It's far harder when the enemy is right in your face. I never really had the chance to be horrified at the enemy design in the Callisto Protocol, given how in your face the biophages are, though their aggressive nature certainly makes for some tense combat encounters. Mechanically, the Callisto Protocol uses a combat system composed of attacks and dodges that are meant to encourage you to be hyper-aggressive against whatever you're fighting. Jacob also comes equipped with a firearm, but ammo is limited, and the gun doesn't do nearly as much damage as your melee attacks, save for when an enemy is momentarily stunned. When this occurs, you have a brief moment to quickly pull out your gun and fire at the highlighted weak spot. Doing so deals a tremendous amount of damage to whatever you're fighting, even potentially carving off the limbs or head of your foe. This can alter your situation by quite a bit. A biophage without legs will have to slowly crawl its way towards you, for example. There was one moment during my preview that I hope is an indication that we'll see more strategic dismemberment in the full release. What I can only imagine is a cheeky reference back to Dead Space. There is a moment in the Callisto Protocol where you find a message written in blood on the wall that says, "Shoot the tentacles." This event precedes encountering biophages with tentacle-lined stomachs that will mutate into more powerful forms once weakened. To deal with them, you have to damage them enough to start mutating, which begins with their stomach tentacles erupting from their body. In this moment, you have precious time to shoot and destroy the tentacles, stopping the transformation. It adds a bit more strategy to the combat since you want to keep a little distance from the biophages that can mutate, just so you can actually see when the process is starting. If they get too close, the animation is oftentimes lost in the flurry of limbs. Essentially, I approached the Callisto Protocol much like Dead Space, Resident Evil, or The Evil Within, carefully weighing the situation and warily approaching each fight, trying to take out one enemy at a time and then pulling back to reassess. That saw me die a lot, because you can't instantly heal in the Callisto Protocol. To heal, Jacob crouches, takes out a syringe, and slowly injects himself. You're a sitting duck for a good while. In a game where the enemies might lumber towards you, even within a group, a healing system like this would be no problem. But enemies in the Callisto Protocol hit hardest when they're in your face, and they do all they can to close the distance on you quickly. With very little room to breathe, I quickly found that it is best to heal after a fight has ended, not during. That means you also have to hit hard and fast against every enemy in the group, ending the battle as quickly as you can. In this way, the Callisto Protocol encourages you to turn the tables on your foes. You have to be the monster in the room, pursuing the biophages with murderous abandon. You want to be overly reckless, of course, as that'll see you end up dead in no time. But I found far more success in the Callisto Protocol when I threw caution to the wind and risked a few hits to land half a dozen of my own. Instead of using the telekinetic grip device to grab objects and throw them at enemies, I most often used it to pull enemies towards me and land an early strike. During an especially harrowing moment in a very narrow hallway featuring a murderous parade of enemies, I only succeeded when I decided to push forward through the deadly onslaught and meet the biophages head on, quickly bashing their first few into the walls to give me the precious seconds necessary to dodge the blows of those who came right after, and then start fighting them all at once, stunning each in quick succession. Playing it safe and being careful only gave the enemies enough time to bunch together and overwhelm me, but being aggressive helped turn the tables on them. The combat isn't all that scary. The violence in the game is brutal and super gross, but in a way that feels geared towards producing shock as opposed to genuine fear. The Callisto Protocol is certainly a survival experience, with scarce resources and hard-hitting enemies always encouraging you to forage for ammo or a health pack. But the section I played lacked the unnerving sense of discomfort I love in my favorite survival horror games. I never really felt like Jacob was ever on the back foot. The dude is an exceptionally capable brawler, and once I got used to the combat, I was holding my own against the biophages. I never felt like I was a dominant force, but I wasn't just some guy totally out of his league either. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, as I really enjoyed what I played of the Callisto Protocol's combat. I just want to warn folks that if you're expecting the Callisto Protocol to be this terrifying horror experience, that's not the vibe I got from the snippet of the game I played. The setting is spooky, the monsters are gross, but this game doesn't seem to match the truly horrific tone of its initial announcement trailer. Granted, almost the entire preview was combat gauntlet after combat gauntlet. I didn't have much chance to see elements of the Callisto Protocol's story play out, or whether or not the game featured much in the way of puzzles or horrifying mysteries to solve. And most notably, the section I played didn't feature opportunities to see how the game's stealth moments worked. If they're there, these elements could be where a lot of the Callisto Protocol's fear factor come from. There was one moment during the session where I was able to sneak around, as I slowly crouch-walked past a robotic guard, and that was nerve-wracking, but the section came and went in a flash, hardly enough time to get a good idea as to how the Callisto Protocol stealth sections play and feel more broadly, but it was just enough time to offer an intriguing glimpse at what could be quite scary. Something that I did notice during that small stealth section that gives me pause is that you have very little control over the camera in the Callisto Protocol, making it very difficult to see anything over Jacob's left shoulder, which is where his character model takes up the most screen real estate. You really only have peripheral vision on your right. Personally, I'm worried that this could result in frustrating deaths, specifically during the stealth segments, as a big part of stealth games is the ability to look around and plan. I imagine that's much harder to do in a game like the Callisto Protocol, given the limits of the camera. Thankfully, the camera didn't create any huge problems for me during the combat, but I think this restriction will be something to look out for once the full game launches and we get a chance to play through the stealth sections, especially if there happen to be scenarios where, if you're not careful, you just die.
Okay, I see what's going on.
The terrifying possibility of insta-kill deaths aside, I came away from the Callisto Protocol feeling tense from the pressure of the enclosed setting and more than a little unnerved by the game's enemy design. But I wasn't scared or terrified of the situation I played through. Jacob is a beast once you get the hang of his dodges and melee strikes, and pulling foes into your mighty swing makes quick enough work of them to make you feel at least on par with these monsters. At least in this one level, the Callisto Protocol seems to be a survival game that prioritizes the challenge of its action-focused combat combat, aiming to create horror and the prospect that you have to get into an enemy's grill to do the most damage and suffer disgusting death animation if you mess up. Once you've grasped how combat works, however, you seem to be one of the scariest monsters in the prison. Obviously, since it's just a preview and I only got to play through a presumably small section of the game, it's way too early to make a definitive call on the Callisto Protocol. A lot of what could make the game more horrifying and scary might be tucked away in parts of the Callisto Protocol I've yet to see. We won't know until the game comes out, but thankfully we don't have long to wait because the Callisto Protocol launches on December 2nd. For more,
which Striking Distance founder Glenn Schofield co-created, is apparent. So, can the spiritual successor live up to the original? In my preview time, I played the level called Habitat on PS5. We weren't able to capture our own gameplay, so the B-roll you're seeing from that level may not line up perfectly to my experience. Anyway, the first things I immediately noticed were the creepy ambient noises. Random squelching, clattering, and faint echoes all around made me feel constantly on edge. If nothing else, Callisto Protocol gets the creepy, constantly anxious environment down to a science. Controlling protagonist Jacob Lee felt a lot like controlling Isaac from Dead Space. You're constantly looking over his shoulders for what lurks ahead. Jacob feels very heavy in movement and feels less like a video game character and more like an actual person you're trying to push in the right direction. His melee attacks are a slower wind-up than his usual FPS melee strikes. His run also feels like a realistic jog speed and not like a tireless super soldier who never runs out of stamina. Jacob's heavy presence in the world combined with his deliberate pace made Callisto Protocol feel even scarier. For the same reasons, the combat is pretty slow and heavy itself. While this feels great in adding realism and anticipation, it was also slightly frustrating sometimes because I couldn't time the attack right to smack a biophage enemy immediately in front of me. With ammo being scarce, much like in Dead Space, melee seemed the best option for dealing with a monster in front of your face. You start with a pistol and a baton and can unlock a shotgun later. You also have the ability to use Jacob's GRP, or grip gravity weapon, to pull things towards you and also push them away. In combat, the grip does come in handy in pulling an enemy, then flinging them into a wall or object that can damage them further. There's limited battery on the weapon though, so you can't just constantly fling enemies off of you. While at the start of the level I could blast through enemies with my pistol at will and restock, I found that the further I went, the less ammo I would find. It got to a point where I realized that I had 5 total bullets left going through multiple checkpoints. Callisto definitely encourages you to save on bullets and use your environment and different combinations to fight through the torn prison, but it doesn't really help you realize you should be prioritizing other options, especially when you're given so much free ammo at the beginning. Being forced into a specific playstyle when you originally thought you had more freedom of choice was a little bit frustrating. The combat almost seems to reward perfect combinations of grip throws, pistol shots, and baton smacks. I had known that going in, I would have been more ready and less frustrated with the lack of ammo. I played Dead Space, and I know what limited ammo feels like, but in Callisto, the ammo somehow feels even more scarce. At a certain point, the aliens you fight will spew tentacles from their chest, and when damaged enough, will mutate into a stronger form. When this happens, a single shot to the tentacles will keep them from mutating. But if you're out of ammo, or if you have just a few shots left and miss, you're very much out of luck and have to either try to melee and dodge, which feels incredibly difficult, or die and try again. This would often lock you into dying and respawning, a cycle that just got more frustrating each time I approached it. Going into Callisto is a challenging experience that really tests your survival skills with precise combinations of attacks. Certain parts of the levels were really like playing a Souls-like game that required you to do some practice runs and fail before getting that perfect pass to progress. Overall, now that I know what to expect, I'm willing to give Callisto another try since the environment was so well done, but I really need to be mentally prepared for frustrations and replaying specific sequences. For more on your favorite horror games, don't miss our hands-on previews of Resident Evil 4 Remake and Dead Space Remake. And for everything else in the world of video games, stick with us.
Hello everyone. I'm the producer of Resident Evil 4, Yoshiaki Hirabayashi. I'm here today to deliver the newest information about the title. First, please enjoy this new gameplay footage.
How far can you have gone? Anyone home? Situation. What the hell's going on? What was that? No fucking way. Bruce, this is Condor 1.
Hunnigan here. What's your sit rep?
President's daughter, Baby Eagle. It's likely she's in this village.
Our intel was correct then. Well done.
Something's happened to the people here. My escorts are... Gotta go. Talk later.
He'll be for the repairs later.
What did you think? As you just saw, we are paying respect to the original game's world while implementing new ideas and state-of-the-art graphics to strengthen the core concepts of the title. We think this game will provide a fresh experience with a sense of familiarity if you played the original that both newcomers and veterans to Resident Evil 4 will enjoy. The Ganados will have all new ways to attack. They are closing in on Leon during his mission and will attack with an even greater variety of methods than in the original release. Leon fights back with firearms, close combat maneuvers, a newly added parry using his knife, and more. Resource management and upgrade elements are critical for survival. Just as in the original, using the attaché case effectively will be key. In addition to managing the weapons and items you carry and synthesizing herbs, this also allows you to craft ammunition and other items.
Over here, stranger.
Of course, we can't forget the merchant.
Something new for you.
You can purchase weapons and items and customize them to suit your playstyle.
We're starting.
We've also added a trade mechanic where rare gems you've collected can be exchanged for special items.
You can't go wrong with that.
We are rebuilding the original game while respecting its core experience, adding new ideas, and modernizing the playfield. Now I'd like to share some new information regarding this product's release. We announced that Resident Evil 4 will also be available on PlayStation 4, in addition to PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, and Xbox Series S, and PC. The PlayStation 4 version can be upgraded to the PlayStation 5 digital version at no additional cost. I'd like to introduce two other editions we are preparing for players looking for more than the standard edition. The first is the Deluxe Edition, which will be available for all platforms. This includes additional content, such as costumes, special weapons, a treasure map, and more. Next is the physical-only Collector's Edition. This edition includes the contents of the Deluxe Edition, as well as a Leon figure, a special map, art book, soundtrack, and more. Also, pre-orders start today. If you pre-order the Standard Edition, you'll receive the Attaché Case Gold and Special Charm handgun ammo. If you pre-order the Deluxe Edition or Collector's Edition, you'll receive the Standard Edition pre-order bonuses, as well as Attaché Case Classic and Special Charm Green Herb. If you pre-order the digital version on the PlayStation Store, you'll receive a mini soundtrack. You can secure these bonuses by pre-ordering Resident Evil 4. Thank you for watching so far. We are working hard to create a game that everyone will enjoy. So please, look forward to it.
Condor 1.
Hunnigan here. What's your sit rep?
President's daughter, Baby Eagle. It's likely she's in this village.
Our intel was correct then. Well done.
Something's happened to the people here. My escorts are... Gotta go. Talk later.
Bill me for the repairs later.
restless dreams. I see that town. Silent Hill.
Why are you here? No, in this place. Why are you here? Here to be punished. That's good, I like it. You know what, I think you're right. I think we've done something so awful. We are stuck here in this place, being judged by these people. But for you, I think it's more than that. I think you're here for some other reason. And I don't want to be anywhere near you when you figure that out.
See you in a few weeks, Spider-Man. New York's only Spider-Man.
Hey, you think you're gonna add that new Spider-Man too?
Whoa. A lot of responsibility for a kid your age.
I can handle it.
Do you remember what we lost when Roxxon bulldozed this block?
What's going on? Underground's attacking Roxxon. They're after Newfork. I have to stop this.
What do you owe the city, huh? You didn't ask to be Spider-Man.
Our family doesn't give up. You know that.
Tinkerer! Stop! Can't let you take that. When they